What you're about to hear is a story that defies belief, a tale that will make you question the familiar faces you see every day and the secrets that lie buried just beneath the surface of our mundane lives. It's a story of horror, mystery, and a truth so grisly it will haunt your thoughts long after you've finished listening. Before we delve into the shadows, make sure you subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell, because you won't want to miss a single detail of this chilling investigation. Now, let us begin. The morning of October 12, 2023, dawned with an unusual chill in the air, a harbinger of the grim discovery that would soon shatter the deceptive tranquility of the bustling marketplace. The market, a vibrant tapestry of sights, sounds, and smells, was the lifeblood of the small town, a place where gossip was traded as freely as goods, and the aroma of fresh produce mingled with the earthy scent of raw meat. At the heart of this chaotic symphony was a beef stall, renowned for its succulent cuts and the affable nature of its owner, a man named Arthur. But on this fateful day, the familiar scent of beef was tainted by a foul odor, a stench that clung to the air like a malevolent shroud, and it was this stench that would unravel a tale of unimaginable horror. It was Mrs. Higgins, a regular customer with a nose as sharp as her tongue, who first noticed the anomaly. Wrinkling her nose in disgust, she complained to Arthur about the putrid smell emanating from his stall. Arthur, a portly man with a perpetually cheerful demeanor, dismissed her concerns with a wave of his hand, attributing the smell to a faulty drainage system. But as the day wore on, the stench intensified, attracting a swarm of flies and a growing number of complaints from other customers. By noon, the once bustling beef stall stood deserted, an island of revulsion in a sea of culinary delights. The turning point came when a stray dog, drawn by the overwhelming odor, began to dig frantically at a loose floorboard behind the counter. Its persistent whining and scratching drew the attention of a few curious onlookers, who watched in morbid fascination as the dog unearthed a small, discolored object. It was a bone, but not the kind one would expect to find at a butcher's stall. It was small, delicate, and eerily human-like. A collective gasp rippled through the small crowd as the grim realization dawned upon them. The local police were immediately summoned, and the beef stall was cordoned off, its once inviting facade now a symbol of a gruesome mystery. The investigation was led by Detective Inspector Davies, a seasoned officer with a reputation for his sharp intellect and unwavering determination. A man of few words, his stern expression and piercing gaze could unnerve the most hardened of criminals. He arrived at the scene with his partner, Detective Sergeant Miller, a young and ambitious officer eager to prove his worth. The sight that greeted them was a scene of controlled chaos. Forensic teams in white suits moved with practiced precision, their every movement a stark contrast to the morbid curiosity of the onlookers held back by the yellow police tape. The initial search of the beef stall yielded a horrifying discovery. Beneath the loose floorboard, a shallow grave had been dug, and within it lay a jumble of human bones. The remains were in an advanced state of decomposition, making immediate identification impossible. The air in the stall was thick with the stench of death, a smell that would haunt the dreams of the officers for nights to come. As the forensic team carefully exhumed the bones, a chilling silence fell over the marketplace. The vibrant hub of commerce had been transformed into a macabre crime scene, and the whispers of the crowd were now filled with fear and speculation. Arthur, the owner of the beef stall, was the prime suspect. His initial denial and dismissive attitude towards the smell now seemed like a desperate attempt to conceal a dark secret. He was taken into custody for questioning, his cheerful facade crumbling under the weight of the accusations. During the interrogation, he maintained his innocence, his voice trembling as he swore he had no knowledge of the bones. He claimed to have rented the stall for the past 5 years and had never noticed anything unusual. His story was plausible, yet his nervous demeanor and inconsistent statements raised suspicions. As the news of the grisly discovery spread through the town, a wave of fear and paranoia gripped the community. The beef stall, once a symbol of nourishment and sustenance, was now a place of death and decay. The townsfolk, who had once greeted Arthur with a friendly smile, now looked at him with a mixture of fear and revulsion. The investigation delved deeper, and the lives of the people connected to the beef stall were scrutinized. The previous owner of the stall, a reclusive old man who had mysteriously disappeared a few years ago, became a person of interest. The butcher who supplied meat to Arthur was also questioned, his alibi for the past few years meticulously checked. The forensic analysis of the bones revealed a chilling detail. The bones belonged to at least 3 different individuals, and they showed signs of being dismembered with a sharp object, a butcher's knife perhaps. The victims had been both male and female, their ages ranging from late teens to early 40s. The lack of any clothing or personal belongings with the remains made identification a daunting task. The police were faced with a complex puzzle, a series of murders that had gone unnoticed for years, concealed beneath the floorboards of a bustling beef stall. The investigation took a new turn when a witness came forward. A young woman who had worked at a neighboring stall claimed to have seen Arthur acting suspiciously on several occasions. She recounted seeing him late at night, long after the market had closed, carrying heavy sacks to his stall. She had dismissed it as him stocking up on supplies, but now, in light of the discovery, her testimony cast a dark shadow of doubt on Arthur's claims of innocence. The police now had a credible witness, and the case against Arthur was getting stronger. However, Detective Davies was not one to jump to conclusions. He believed that there was more to the story than met the eye. He decided to delve into the history of the beef stall, to uncover the secrets that lay buried in its past. He discovered that the stall had a long and sordid history, with several owners over the years, many of whom had met with unfortunate ends. The stall seemed to be cursed, a place where tragedy and death were as common as the sale of meat. As the investigation progressed, the focus shifted from Arthur to the previous owner of the stall, a man named Mr. Peterson. He was a recluse, a man who had kept to himself and had few friends. He had sold the stall to Arthur 5 years ago and had not been seen since. The police launched a nationwide search for him, but he seemed to have vanished without a trace. The mystery deepened, and the question on everyone's mind was whether Mr. Peterson was a victim or a perpetrator. The first chapter of the investigation had drawn to a close, but the story was far from over. The discovery of the human bones at the beef stall had opened a Pandora's box of secrets and lies, and the town would never be the same again. The once peaceful community was now living in fear, and the beef stall stood as a grim reminder of the darkness that can lurk in the most unexpected of places. The investigation had just begun, and Detective Davies knew that he was on the verge of uncovering a truth that was far more sinister and horrifying than he could have ever imagined. The abattoir of whispers had started to reveal its secrets, and the ghosts of the past were crying out for justice. The initial shock of the discovery had subsided, replaced by a gnawing unease that permeated the town. The beef stall, now a permanent fixture in the local news, stood as a macabre monument to the unknown victims. Detective Inspector Davies and his team found themselves at a frustrating standstill. The forensic analysis had provided the grim details of the murders, but the identities of the victims remained elusive. With no names, no faces, they were just a collection of bones, a silent testament to a series of brutal crimes. The National Database for Missing Persons had yielded no matches, suggesting that the victims were either not from the area or their disappearances had never been reported. Arthur, the beleaguered owner of the beef stall, was released on bail. The witness testimony had been compelling, but without any concrete evidence linking him directly to the murders, the prosecution had a weak case. The cloud of suspicion, however, hung over him like a persistent fog. His business was ruined, his reputation in tatters, and he became a pariah in the town he had once called home. The once jovial butcher was now a gaunt figure, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and despair. He maintained his innocence, but his words were lost in the cacophony of public opinion. Detective Davies, a man who trusted his instincts as much as he trusted evidence, felt that Arthur was not the killer. He was a man caught in a web of circumstances, a convenient scapegoat for a town baying for blood. The focus of the investigation shifted back to the enigmatic Mr. Peterson, the previous owner of the stall. The search for him intensified, his face plastered on posters and news channels across the country. but it was as if the man had vanished from the face of the earth. His past was a blank slate with no family, no friends, and no digital footprint. He was a ghost, a phantom who had left behind a trail of death and mystery. The investigation into the history of the beef stall unearthed a series of disturbing events. Over the past few decades, the stall had changed hands multiple times, and a string of misfortunes had befallen its previous owners. One had died in a mysterious fire, another had been found drowned in a nearby river, and a third had simply vanished, much like Mr. Peterson. The locals spoke of a curse, of a dark entity that resided within the walls of the stall, claiming the lives of those who dared to occupy it. The stories were dismissed as folklore, but the pattern of deaths and disappearances was too conspicuous to ignore. Detective Davies, a pragmatist who had little time for ghost stories, believed that the curse was a convenient cover for a more human evil. He suspected that the stall had been used as a dumping ground for a serial killer, a predator who had been operating in the shadows for years, his crimes concealed by the superstitious tales of the locals. The theory was a chilling one, but it was the only one that fit the facts. The dismembered bodies, the multiple victims, the long timeline of the murders, it all pointed to a single, highly organized killer. The breakthrough in the case came from an unexpected source. A retired police officer, who had worked on the case of the previous owner's disappearance, contacted Detective Davies. He had always been troubled by the case, by the lack of any leads and the way it had been summarily closed. He shared his old case files with Davies, and among the dusty papers and faded photographs, a new lead emerged. A witness had reported seeing Mr. Peterson in the company of a younger man shortly before his disappearance. The witness had described the man as being tall, with a gaunt face and a distinctive scar above his left eye. The description was vague, but it was a start. The police artist created a composite sketch of the mysterious man, and it was circulated among the local community. The response was overwhelming. Several people came forward, claiming to have seen the man in the vicinity of the marketplace around the time of Mr. Peterson's disappearance. He was a transient, a drifter who had worked odd jobs in the area before moving on. He was known for his quiet demeanor and his unsettling gaze. The pieces of the puzzle were slowly starting to fall into place. The investigation now had a new focus, a faceless man with a scar above his eye. The search for him became a priority, and the police resources were stretched to their limits. They scoured through records of transient workers, checked homeless shelters, and interviewed anyone who might have come into contact with him. It was a painstaking process, a search for a needle in a haystack. But Detective Davies was relentless, his determination fueled by the desire to bring justice to the nameless victims. Meanwhile, Arthur, the beleaguered butcher, decided to take matters into his own hands. He was a man on the edge, his life in ruins, and he was determined to clear his name. He started his own investigation, revisiting the past, talking to the old-timers in the market, trying to piece together the history of the cursed stall. He learned of the strange occurrences, the whispers of the locals, and the stories of the previous owners who had met with tragic ends. He became obsessed with the stall, spending hours in the now empty space, searching for any clue that might have been missed. It was during one of these solitary vigils that he made a discovery. He found a loose brick in the back wall of the stall, and behind it, a small, locked metal box. He managed to pry it open, and inside, he found a collection of old photographs and a diary. The diary belonged to Mr. Peterson, and its pages were filled with his spidery handwriting, a chronicle of his descent into madness. The photographs were of the victims, their smiling faces a stark contrast to the grim fate that had befallen them. The diary was a chilling confession, a detailed account of the murders. Mr. Peterson was the killer, a predator who had used the beef stall as his hunting ground, his abattoir of horrors. The diary revealed his twisted bogle, his belief that he was cleansing the world of its impurities, one victim at a time. The young man with the scar was his accomplice, a disciple who had helped him in his gruesome deeds. The diary also revealed the location of their final victim, a young woman who had been buried in the nearby woods. Arthur immediately contacted Detective Davies, and the police descended on the woods. They found the shallow grave, and the remains of the young woman were exhumed. The discovery of the diary and the final victim provided the police with the evidence they needed. The case was no longer a mystery, but the hunt for the accomplice was still on. The man with the scar was the missing piece of the puzzle, the key to understanding the full extent of Mr. Peterson's reign of terror. The second chapter of the investigation had come to a close, but the story was far from over. The ghosts of the marketplace had been unmasked, but the man who had helped create them was still at large. The town was still on edge, the fear of the unknown replaced by the fear of a known killer on the loose. The investigation was now a manhunt, a race against time to capture the accomplice before he could claim another victim. Detective Davies knew that the final chapter of this gruesome tale was yet to be written, and it would be a chapter of reckoning, a chapter of justice for the victims and their families. The hunt for the man with the scar had begun, and it would be a hunt that would push the limits of the police force and the resilience of the community. The final act of this tragedy was about to unfold, and it promised to be a dramatic and violent conclusion to a story that had started with a foul stench and a few scattered bones. The discovery of Mr. Peterson's diary had sent a shockwave through the investigation, transforming a perplexing mystery into a frantic manhunt. The diary, a testament to a mind twisted by a dark and perverse ideology, had provided the police with a chilling insight into the killer's motives. But it was the mention of an accomplice, the man with the scar, that now consumed the efforts of Detective Inspector Davies and his team. He was the loose end, the final piece of a gruesome puzzle that needed to be put in place. The composite sketch of the man was now a permanent fixture on every television screen and newspaper in the country. His gaunt face and the distinctive scar above his eye a symbol of the evil that had plagued the town. The manhunt was a relentless and all-consuming endeavor. The police, aided by national agencies, cast a wide net, leaving no stone unturned. They followed up on every lead, no matter how tenuous, and the public's response was overwhelming. Sightings were reported from all corners of the country, from bustling cities to remote villages. But each lead turned out to be a dead end, a case of mistaken identity or a false alarm. The man with the scar was like a phantom, always one step ahead, his trail as cold as the graves of his victims. Meanwhile, Arthur, the man who had inadvertently brought the horrors of the beef stall to light, found himself in a strange and unfamiliar position. He was no longer a suspect, but a hero. The town that had once ostracized him now hailed him as a savior, the man who had helped to uncover the truth. But the adulation brought him little comfort. The memories of the past few weeks, the accusations, the fear, the public humiliation, had left a deep and lasting scar on his psyche. He was a changed man, his once cheerful demeanor replaced by a quiet and somber introspection. He had become a recluse, shunning the public eye, finding solace in the solitude of his home. As the manhunt continued, a new and disturbing pattern began to emerge. A series of brutal murders, bearing the same gruesome signature as the beef stall killings, were reported in different parts of the country. The victims were all young women, their bodies dismembered and disposed of in a similar fashion. It was clear that the man with the scar was no longer just an accomplice. He was a killer in his own right, continuing the bloody legacy of his mentor. The manhunt took on a new sense of urgency, the pressure on Detective Davies and his team mounting with each new victim. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A sharp-eyed librarian in a small, remote town noticed a man matching the description of the fugitive. He was a regular at the library, a quiet and unassuming man who spent his days poring over books on anatomy and surgical procedures. The librarian, her suspicion aroused, contacted the police, and a surveillance operation was immediately put in place. The man was placed under constant watch, his every move monitored, as the police gathered the evidence they needed to make an arrest. The final confrontation was a tense and dramatic affair. The police, armed and ready, stormed the man's small, rented apartment. They found him in the midst of a gruesome ritual, a new victim lying on a makeshift altar, the man's hands stained with blood. He offered no resistance, his face a mask of cold and detached indifference. He was arrested and taken into custody, the reign of terror finally at an end. The man's name was Thomas, a former medical student who had dropped out of college after a series of personal tragedies. He was a lost and vulnerable soul when he met Mr. Peterson, who had taken him under his wing, molding him in his own twisted image. Thomas had become his disciple, his accomplice, and eventually his successor. He had continued the killings after Mr. Peterson's disappearance, driven by a misguided sense of loyalty and a deep-seated rage against the world. The trial was a media sensation, the gruesome details of the murders laid bare for the world to see. Thomas, his face impassive throughout the proceedings, was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The verdict brought a sense of closure to the families of the victims and the town that had been living in the shadow of fear for so long. The beef stall, the epicenter of the horror, was demolished, its cursed ground cleansed of the evil that had resided within its walls. A memorial was erected in its place, a tribute to the victims, their names now known, their stories now told. The town slowly began to heal, the wounds of the past gradually fading, but the memory of the abattoir of whispers would forever be etched in the collective consciousness of the community. Detective Inspector Davies, the man who had led the investigation with unwavering determination, was hailed as a hero. But he found little joy in the accolades. The case had taken its toll on him. The images of the victims, the chilling words of Mr. Peterson's diary, a constant and haunting presence in his mind. He had brought the killers to justice, but the ghosts of the marketplace would forever be a part of him. Arthur, the man who had lost everything and then found a strange and unwanted form of redemption, decided to leave the town. He sold his house and moved to a quiet coastal village, seeking a new life, a fresh start. He would forever be known as the man who had unearthed the grisly truth, a man whose life had been irrevocably changed by a foul stench and a few scattered bones. The story of the tragic human bones at the beef stall became a cautionary tale, a grim reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of our ordinary lives. It was a story of a town's loss of innocence, a story of a detective's relentless pursuit of justice, and a story of a butcher's unwitting descent into a real-life nightmare. And as the years passed, the story would be told and retold, a local legend, a chilling tale whispered in the hushed tones of a community that had looked into the abyss and had seen the face of evil. The abattoir of whispers was no more, but its echoes would linger on, a haunting reminder of the time when death had set up shop in the heart of their town. 5 years is a long time, long enough for grass to reclaim disturbed earth, for a marketplace once tainted by death to find its bustling rhythm again, and for the sharp edges of horror to dull into a cautionary tale whispered around campfires. The town had tried to heal. The beef stall, the epicenter of the nightmare, had been razed. In its place now stood a small marble memorial, a quiet, dignified structure etched with the names of the victims whose identities had finally been pieced together. It stood as a permanent reminder of the darkness that could lurk just beneath the surface of ordinary life. For Detective Inspector Davies, now grayer and with the lines around his eyes etched deeper, 5 years had erased nothing. The market butcher case had been the defining moment of his career, a nationally lauded success, but it was also the case that had hollowed him out. He had looked into the abyss, and the abyss had looked back, leaving a permanent, chilling imprint. He was on the cusp of retirement, his final days at the precinct spent mostly in the mundane ritual of clearing out his office, a quiet end to a storied career. But no matter how many files he packed away, he couldn't escape the ghosts of that case. The evidence boxes still sat in the corner of his office, a silent, morbid invitation. Sometimes, late at night when the building was quiet, he would open them. He would reread Peterson's diary, the mad scrawls of a deranged mind still seeming to ooze malevolence from the page. He wasn't looking for clues anymore. He was searching for understanding, for some sliver of logic in the madness, but it never came. A year before his retirement, Davies had done something he'd never told another soul. He had visited Thomas in a maximum security prison. The man with the scar, Peterson's bloody successor, looked much the same, gaunt, with eyes that were vacant and devoid of emotion. Davies had sat opposite him, separated by thick plexiglass, hoping to find a flicker of remorse, a spark of humanity. "Why?" Davies had asked, his voice raw. "After Peterson was gone, you could have stopped. You could have started over." Thomas had looked at him, the faintest hint of a smile touching his lips. "Stop," he'd said, his voice flat and cold. "That's like asking an artist to stop painting, Inspector. The work wasn't finished. The world is still full of imperfections that need to be cleansed." In that moment, Davies understood. There was no rational explanation. There was no past trauma that could justify this level of depravity. This was pure, unadulterated evil, cold and irredeemable. He left the prison feeling a profound emptiness that settled deep in his bones. The encounter had cemented his decision to retire. He had spent his life fighting monsters, but he realized you could never truly kill the darkness. You could only hope to hold it at bay for a while. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away in a quiet coastal village, Arthur was living a different life. He had sold his house in the old town and used the money to open a small second-hand bookshop. The air here smelled of old paper and sea salt, a welcome replacement for the haunting scent of iron and raw meat. He had found a measure of peace. He had regular customers, small conversations about the weather and the latest novels. He'd gotten a dog, a loyal companion whose simple joy was a balm to his fractured soul. But the scars remained. He suffered from post-traumatic stress. A creaking floorboard, the smell of a barbecue from a neighbor's yard, or even the simple buzzing of a fly could sometimes be enough to send him spiraling back to the damp, cloying confines of the stall. He would wake up in the dead of night, drenched in a cold sweat, the image of stark white bones seared into his mind's eye. He never spoke of his nightmares. To the new townspeople, he was simply Arthur, the quiet, kind bookseller. His past was a closed chapter he was determined to keep sealed. The past, however, has a way of finding you. One day, a young, ambitious journalist walked into his shop. She recognized him from old newspaper photos. She was writing a 5-year anniversary piece on the case, a "Where Are They Now" story. At first, Arthur refused flatly. He was tired of being the butcher who found the bones. He wanted nothing more than to be forgotten. But that night, sitting alone in his flat above the shop, he reconsidered. Perhaps silence wasn't the answer. Perhaps telling his story, not for fame or notoriety, but for remembrance, was the right thing to do. He wanted people to remember the victims, the people whose lives, hopes, and dreams had been so brutally extinguished. He didn't want them to be remembered simply as the bones. The next day, he called the journalist and agreed to an interview. He spoke for hours, his voice low and steady, recounting everything not with fear, but with a profound, weary sadness. It was a catharsis, a way of exorcising the demons that had haunted him for so long. Back in the town, life went on. The younger generation, those who were mere toddlers when the case broke, were now teenagers. To them, the story of the market butcher was just a grisly local legend, a ghost story told to spook each other on Halloween nights. They walked past the memorial with a casual indifference, unable to grasp the real, tangible fear that had once choked their community. Their ignorance was both a blessing and a small tragedy, a blessing that they didn't have to carry the weight of the past. A tragedy because forgetting can be a dangerous thing. The echoes of the abattoir of whispers had faded, but for those who had lived through it, the silence that followed was a sound all its own.